I'll open the batting, just talking about feedback from the Canterbury Council's LTP meeting that we held in this chamber on Monday of this week. Firstly, really impressed with the levels of knowledge and the advances that councils are making in terms of their LTPs, but there are a few cautionary notes. Some of the issues that came out that you might be interested in, the first one was just reminding everybody to have a look at the levels of reserves that are being held. And as a sector, we tend to squirrel away reserves that have been, rainy day stuff. We never really get to use it. Recall the book that I've been circulating along with Greg the last couple of years. Familiarise yourself with those reserves and say, is it the right thing to keep holding it and just nesting it? Or is there an opportunity now, particularly when we're under financial constraint, to lift the lid on some of those reserves and utilise them a wee bit better? Second one, a number of councils are looking at rate smoothing requirements. A few blips from some of the councils in the early years, particularly as whilst everybody's trying to keep lower rating levels for 21, 22 and probably 22, 23, everybody's also got the realisation that we're probably already catching up on the current year where we had artificially low levels. The first of the cautionary notes is that the work of Audit New Zealand. There are a huge number of councils around the country, and certainly around Canterbury area, who haven't had their annual report signed off yet. And equally in our own space, we've got auditors sitting on the printed copy until they read through it and have another go at it. And I've also seen a lot of frustrated staff. Some of the audit questions that are being asked this year. Now, Kelvin and I have got a face-to-face with Julian next week, I think it is, Kelvin, isn't it? Just to talk about those issues, A, from a Selwyn perspective, B, from a Canterbury-wide perspective. And I've been in this game for quite a long time, and I mean, the organisation that's holding us back is the one that's often pointing fingers at us and saying, hey, you weren't ready, you weren't prepared. Well, we were. Here's the documentation. It's not our problem. COVID-19, yeah, we've got problems as well in terms of resourcing and response that we have to go to. We're concerned about the impacts of central government demands on key staff, and I'm particularly talking about the DIA requirements. I think Murray told me the other day, 1,300 separate line items of information. And this is people at the Murray, England level of the organisation that are going to have to be solely focused on this for, we reckon, at least a month anyway. Talking about fees and charges, and we will be, when we do our presentation on the LTP next week, bringing another paper on fees and charge increases, which we think are highly supportable. Funding of depreciation, particularly on Three Waters. So we acknowledge that Three Waters assets are being handed over on the 1st of July 23 in terms of funding of maintenance, but more importantly, funding of depreciation and those reserves. ECAN have suggested that we joined up consultation, and we think that's a commendable thing to follow, and that will be around simply where we have open sessions to talk about our annual plan and invite ECAN people to come along as well. A, because there's some crossover activities, and B, it helps them with their consultation as well. So it's a two-for-one thing, if you like. The bass drum that I've been hitting for a long time, our CapEx program, clear message coming through from OAG about making sure we deliver what we put up, or what we're funding and we put up. Equally this time though, we're a wee bit concerned about capacity to deliver, not within local government circles, but rather within contracting sector, because we've got stimulus projects and we've also got shovel-ready projects that are out there at the moment as well. The greatest risk that I see is not on local government sector's shoulders around getting LTPs done, but on the audit sector having their field work done. So again, the meeting Kelvin and I are having next week is really just to nail down those dates. At the moment, we're pretty singularly focused on going out for consultation the week before Easter and taking a 4-week period to do that. So I'm happy to answer any questions on that through the course of the report, Mr. Chair. Going to throw to Kelvin to talk about the next 2 items, the financial reporting template and health and safety reporting.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Financial reporting, as I updated at the last meeting, we're going through this process of review. Where we're currently at is I have working through a matrix of list of requirements of reporting, and that's focused upon what would be a good standard governance around financial and risk related reporting. It's focused back on the terms of reference of this committee to make sure that we're covering off the terms of reference items. In terms of development of reports off the back of that, not quite as quick as progress as I'd hoped, given the pressures of LTP and my staff being busy churning out numbers for the council on that. My intention is at the 16th workshop, as I will have a view of that. I thought it's a more appropriate place to take to a workshop as opposed to this meeting to discuss, where we can openly chat around some of those reporting needs and requirements. But that's where that piece is at the moment. Just before we come to health and safety, might just move to item 4, which is the audit manager management letter. It's attached to the papers here. Really pleasing report. Very little in it. What we have done as a team is cleaned out a lot of the outstanding actions, and we're now left with a handful sitting in there that need to be completed. And these are not significant in nature. One of them is, as David was saying, the auditors were quite pedantic this time around. The feedback from my peers across other councils is the additional time they are given with the extension of reporting opened the door for them to drill a little bit into deeper items, which were not necessarily helpful. So any questions on that management letter? I'll just take those now.
Kelvin, I think, yeah, sorry, the comment, anyways. That's right. I guess really it's not so much a question, it's really just from me a congratulations on that outcome and the letter received. Is, I think in my admittedly only 4 years around this table, it's the cleanest report and best response we've had in regards to our working with Audit New Zealand, issues notwithstanding. So just to create congratulations again to all staff involved in that process. So yeah.
Thanks. I'll pass it on because I can't take credit. I only arrived at the end. Before we come to the work plan, I want to just Dan to come up and walk through the health and safety report, which is on pages.
Just if we go through the report in whole, all of the item 3, and we'll perhaps reserve questions on the entire report to the end, if that's all right with everybody.
Good morning, everyone. So I suppose I could probably take the report as read. I'd assume everyone's had the opportunity to get through it. Probably the first full report we've presented. I want to kind of caveat with at the start that this report is a progress report. In the future, we'll have some more metrics. And obviously, if you read at the start of the report, it's mentioned around performance measures. We're in the process at the moment of going through strategic development of a strategic plan for the council in regards to health, safety and wellbeing. We've run a number of workshops or a few workshops with the people leaders and with the executive leadership team, as well as our safety committee, to help them co-create that so that they've got some ownership and buy-in in regards to how that looks. So, and there's obviously some dependencies on our current existing systems to enable us to report accurate and informative metrics as they relate to health, safety and wellbeing. I suppose that covers the first page. I'm going to jump straight to the initiatives that we've started, which will probably be folded into the strategy in time, but these are things that we've been doing over the last 3 to 4 months since I've been here. If there are any questions at all, please just jump in. So strategy, we've ran one workshop with the ELT. We've got another one coming up this month. We've ran one workshop with our people leaders and also conducted a bit of a survey on some of the challenges they've had or frustrations, where they think we can improve and enhance it. We need to extend this to look outside of our internal organisation, to look at our external risks as it relates to our service providers, major builds around some of our facilities as well, So our awareness of, as the main organisation engaging these contractors, we need to have a really good clarity around the risks that they're being exposed to, as well as ensuring that when we are designing and building things, we're designing with safety in mind, so for our public and our community. Opsec, I don't know how many of you are aware of the Opsec report, but that probably would have come through this committee. We've had approval to spend some money this financial year. Douglas made that available, and my team are going to work with the property team to start working on the high priorities areas. There's been mention from Douglas that there is subsequent funding available for the next 2 to 3 years to close off the larger items as it relates to that report. So I peer reviewed the report from Opsec and then put recommendations with the areas we worked at. Committee structure. So before my time, Sarah Shea commissioned a report from a company called Impact to review the health and safety at SDC. As a result of that, one of the health and safety committees was disestablished, and the current committee doesn't really know where they're going, to be honest. So we kind of spent a bit of time working with them around finding out what their purpose is, how they integrate to the business, and what the reporting looks like from them. That's going really well, and we've got a draft proposal that we'll discuss on the 17th with the ELT and the chair of the Health and Safety Committee, as well as support from Annalisa in the early stages. Drug and alcohol policy, we've got our final draft, should be ready for review by ELT by the end of this week, working with TDDA. Lone remote working, we have 2 to 3 organisations we're getting information off. We've done a needs analysis based off what our organisation feels we need. This will be replicating similar to what other councils have done. So in the North Island, there's at least 15 councils, as well as WorkSafe New Zealand, that use one of these organisations. They have a lot of support and technology that looks at ensuring that our workers around one of our critical risks are supported when they're working remotely in isolated locations. No start yet is which stuff that kills you or critical risks. That will be looked at as part of the strategy, so no movement on that as yet. There's a business case for the possible replacement of our existing reporting system through Kelvin. We've got a ongoing reporting has been going from ELT from me for the last 3 months, and a revised structure of what that will look like will be delivered on the 17th of December. Wellbeing plan, that was a quick initiative that we ran post-COVID. We've got some things that are in play at the moment, but we'll review that again at the start of next year, see whether it's fit for purpose. A number of webinars have been run with staff, and we'll seek their feedback on what wellbeing looks like for them. Training review, again, our full needs analysis has been completed. This will result in an increase in training and competency requirements for our staff, especially around things as we relate to violence or possible violence at our facilities from unhappy members of the public. So a lot of de-escalation training and awareness is going to be occurring in the coming months. Haven't looked at annual health monitoring yet, but from my understanding, we have not done that consistently, to be honest, and we don't have ongoing records of annual health monitoring. We haven't even ascertained the risk as associated with that. We've done some stuff historically, but that's been a little bit not uniformed in its approach. If we move to reporting template, major contracts, we've delivered a reporting template to some of our major contractors, and now it's getting them to align their reporting. We had an event that occurred that we'll discuss if you wish, that was reported through to me through the safety manager from that particular company, but didn't hit the monthly report from their organisation. So aligning the consistency of their reporting and ensuring we're getting what we need is critical. Any questions on that? Very quick update on progress to date.
Bob, you've got one. I'm sure there'll be
Just on
several.
the, isolated working.
Yes.
Will elected members be involved with that as well? Because it's something that elected members do quite a bit, is go to Arthur's Pass and things like that. Well,
It hadn't been included in the original scope. I think that would be something we could look at in that regard. But yeah, I'd take guidance from this group in regards to if that's what they wanted to occur.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think there's a lot of merit in doing that, Bob, and that's something that we'll extend our thinking to. And it will require a two-way discipline. So we'll require elected members, both to council and to the community board, to advise us when they're going to your evening meeting scenarios or whatever.
I've got a few things, as expected, which is great because, first of all, Kapai Mahi, this is great work and very refreshing to see health and safety starting at page 17 of an Audit and Risk Committee pack, which is exactly where it should sit, straight under the Chief Executive's Chair's report. So very refreshing, and I was very excited to see that report, so that's great work. A couple of comments, a couple of questions, but mainly sort of comments for the committee, because obviously we'll be working through this together at a later stage. But when coming in as a fresh set of eyes, as Dan is looking at, we're looking at strategy, systems, people, and process. So you've kind of got that with your table of progress to date. So maybe just for as regular updates going forward, maybe you can kind of split that to make sure we are covering strategy, systems, people, process, because obviously you've done a huge amount of work since you've got here, but there's still a huge amount of work to do. So if you keep thinking about strategy, people, systems, process, it kind of covers the full breadth of work to be done. Site, so I'll go through my comments first and then I'll leave the questions to the end. Site visits. So we went to site visit this morning, which was great. It's very informative. But I think going forward is good practice. I made a recommendation around this committee going on that advanced health and safety governance course at IOD, but I strongly recommend that for any site visit that we attend, that Dan should be there in attendance, because his eyes are a lot better than our eyes. I mean, I've obviously got a background. I was looking and hearing and listening, but I was quite surprised that I know we didn't go on site, but at no time did any project manager or anyone on site tell us about any of the critical risks on site. I asked the question once or twice, and they sort of fumbled around, and they even went to the stage of inviting us on site with no health and safety induction. So at all times, anytime we go on site, even if we're not going onto the actual construction site, if we're just in the car park, you've now got a health and safety specialist, so he should be there with us to guide us and to influence us, to train us, to educate us, and to be our eyes and ears, because we obviously need to upskill in this area. Measures, great to see that the measures will come. I know that obviously you've been very experienced. TRIFA is a measure that old school governors kind of understand and very comfortable with, but Dan's going to take us on a journey of having more appropriate measures, so they'll come in a timely manner. Comment around the systems, and we can discuss this at a later date, but I'm just interested to know that we are going wider than just putting one system up for selection, and just want to understand if we've gone through a requirements kind of process, because obviously there's 4 or 5 really good health and safety systems in the market, so I just want to make sure we've gone through a system selection process and gathered our requirements for that system. And the last thing, vision. So I know we can have a vision and we can have a tagline, and we can work together later on this. But when you take an organisation on a health and safety cultural lift and get health and safety culture into an organisation, I just want to make sure and understand what the process is that's been around developing that vision, because if that's done really well, we should never give a vision to people. They should actually come up with that themselves. So it'd be good to understand how that process has been done to make sure that it's been a real consultation type, just to get that culture and buy-in. So yeah, that's it from me. But as I say, great work, Dan. So well done.
Yeah, thank you. Made note of all those comments and can definitely address them in future. Just on the 2 last points, the system, that business case, I've done that in collaboration with our IT manager, and we've done a needs assessments. The original business case is just to get permission to start searching, and well aware of we've had a number of organisations knock on our door wanting our business. In reference to the vision, yeah, hugely important. We've had some really good feedback from the LT, and we had a great session last week with about 10 of our people leaders and some of our safety committees as well. They have come up with their ideas, and I shared something with Sarah just last night, so I can show you what they've come up with, and then we've got a few more workshops to do to really refine that. So I agree 100% about getting collaboration and buy-in from all parts of the stakeholder framework.
Good. Thank you, Annalisa. Again, that reinforces the value of having you around the table, but it also gives us a spur, as you've said, for us to look at the governance side of health and safety. And I'm sure a number of us sitting around this table certainly have a view from a management side of it in our own careers outside of this venue and our workplace here. But what we probably don't have is that training there, and it's quite timely. You're absolutely right. So I think we need to advance that. David and I will have a discussion certainly about that training as soon as we can practicably do it. And I don't imagine there's anyone who objects to that around the table, us doing that course. So we'll make that happen.
And I think that's one of those focus areas, Mr. Chair, for our workshop on the 16th as well, just to know those things down. Yep, that's cool.
Thanks, Dan. I don't think there are any more questions around the table. So it is the beginning of a very good and important journey for us as well. And as has been pointed out, having it at the start of the agenda is absolutely correct. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your
So
time, David.
the last couple of items in the report, item 5 is just for you to note in your calendar the dates for subcommittee meetings for next year. So we're following the same formula as we are this year, with meetings being all held in here and all starting at 9:30. And the next item is the proposed site visits, and they again are proposed to start at 8 a.m. and I know that's not suitable for everybody, so we're just trying to flex that where opportunities are provided. We've put a list of those sites that we are intending to visit. Obviously this is very flexible and situations will change as we go through the course of the year, but we're just going to lock these ones. And at this stage, I just want to talk to the first two, Mr. Chair, forestry sites and gravel pit visits. These were identified risk areas for council, both in terms of continued ownership, operation, and in some cases, location and maintenance. Are we still best to be the owners? Are there opportunities to tidy up, on, sell, close down, whatever it might be? Staff have made a lot of progress in both of these areas. So we would like today was just to get eyes on these things to see what advances have been made, but equally to ask the why question around continued ownership. Happy to answer any comments, but a lot of the technical stuff today, Mr. Chair, is in reports that follow.
Sam.
Yeah, here's my comments just around our site visits and thinking about the amount of time we're able to contribute to them if they're squeezed on a Wednesday before what always ends up being quite a long afternoon as well. So we have this meeting and then there'll be annual plan, long-term plan meetings, the representation review, we've got council meetings next year as well. And rather than trying to have a really early start and then an hour and a half to do something, I wonder about committing more time to it, perhaps on a Thursday, to find a different day that works for the committee, where it can be, you know, a 3 or 4 hour commitment. We can actually get on site and not just see things, but experience them a wee bit more. Yeah, just a thought.
An option that we might want to look at, and again, I think the opportunity in our workshop on the 16th is maybe to put aside a full day every quarter and taking a whole variety of things. So, you know, go and have a look at whatever combo of things here it might be.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, just from experience of sitting on other audit and risk committees and attending site visits pre an audit and risk committee, which works well. So for this morning's example, I would have gone to one site only. And then you could have done a full health and safety induction. You could have gone on site. They could have showed you the critical risks. They could have showed you how they were managing those critical risks, but then also told us all the good and exciting stuff that we were asking questions about. But we could have done a proper health and safety induction, seen the risks, seen how they were managing them, and then hear about the project. So I think it's still doable pre-audit and risk, but just one site per. But obviously we can do that in the workshop maybe.
Yeah, rather than debate it today, the purpose of the workshop obviously is to refine that. So as I said to the Chief Executive, the dates and the proposed dates are just that. I would expect that we will put those up today and pass them, but as a work in progress and we'll refine that over the course of the year. And it's a moving document for us as well. So all those points are valid, and I think we should debate those in the appropriate time frame at that meeting. Are there any further questions on, David, that's the end of your report. If there's any further, I just had a couple of comments if there's no others. Just with the health and safety, obviously it's good to see that the focus is on people and outcomes, not compliance, and that was noted in the report very strongly, and I think that's absolutely appropriate, that this isn't just box ticking, it's actually having an outcome that looks after our people, including ourselves, if we're being honest. Also, the alignment there is with use of IT, and I just note with the annual report from SciCon that they're making use of very cutting edge IT about where their people are, and there's obviously a chance to integrate our systems with them potentially as well as a company that we have control over as a council controlled organisation. So there's an opportunity certainly for us to be able to work more closely as we are now with SciCon, building a really good relationship. And it might be that some of those initiatives are complementary to both organisations. Reporting structure back to audit and risk, we will discuss the future, and that's been touched on by a number of members rather. It's going to be critical that we know what our risk is and what our response is, and our legal risk, and the timeliness of information to this committee and that reporting structure back. We've also talked about in other reports reference to internal control override in the audit letter, Kelvin, and none found, which I think is absolutely fantastic. It shows that the level of oversight as to our risk to interference is low, which is commendable. The rest of it really was just minor stuff. So as I said before, congratulations on that, and we hope that goes forward. So we have a recommendation there that is received.
So it's a recommendation to receive.
Receive, yes. So I'll have a mover for that. Nicole and Bob, was it? All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. We'll go to, it'll be Kelvin with Draft Audit and Risk Subcommittee Work Plan for 2021.
And just by way of introduction, while Kelvin's working his way to the front, subcommittee members will recall that under our terms of reference, there is a requirement to sign off on the next calendar year's work program prior to the end of the preceding financial calendar year. So
the only thing I note there, Kelvin, on page 51 is I'm hoping it's a draft, not a daft.
Oh, it's daft.
Yeah.
No,
it may be a reference to some of the members of the committee. I'm not sure, but we might want to.
I wasn't going to say that, Mark.
Yes,
no.
please, thank you, Kelvin.
I'll just take this as read and really open it to comments. But what we've tried to do here is to make sure that prioritising health and safety with reports back each meeting, and a view on our top 10 risks, just monitoring those as we go along. And then, as we discussed at the workshop earlier in the year, around focusing on specific risk areas on a quarterly type basis. And there's a few items which pop up in relation to specific events, such as annual financial statements and assumptions around annual plans and long-term plans and bits and pieces like that. So I'll just take questions.
And Lisa.
I've just made some amendments in hard copy, which I can just hand over to you, which will probably be easier rather than going through the granular detail, but it's just for referencing of minutes, I guess, in recording. I've just, in the risk section, kept the top 10 risks and project risks, but just tidied it up a little bit. So as my third item, just recommending that we have extreme and high residual risks over operations, including compliance, and maybe do that on a quarterly basis. So we do top 10 risks and project risks every meeting, but then move other risks and just look at the extreme and high ones on a quarterly basis. Yeah, and then obviously just confirming that we have aligned this to the terms of reference, which you said previously. So I'll just hand you over my hard copy.
Governor, you want to make a comment now? You'll await, obviously you'll await that document before there's really any.
Yeah, I'll
any way
take a
you
look
can
at that
comment.
and circulate it back once I've incorporated those.
Are there any further questions there? Obviously, this doesn't include some of the pre-programmed things we have, which is presentations from likes of Psychon, and I know it's another matter, but we're comfortable that we can align those and not end up with one meeting that's overly onerous and one that's overly light, for want of a bit of a better term. I guess that's just a matter of aligning those, you know, our key dates of reporting.
Yeah, some of the challenges on that. Sorry, some of the challenges on that is just timing with auditors and various things. But
yeah, absolutely.
I think pre-planning a quarter ahead will be useful as we go through this.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about is alignment with SOIs, where there are report back dates as well. Yeah.
Just one issue. I guess it comes under risk management, internal control and assurance. Just want to know where would we fit in the need that if a emergency situation actually arose that required audit and risk to actually require a report to be presented to audit and risk. It could be just a project that's not considered sometimes high priority, but then suddenly something happens and it needs to be reported through us.
You do that two ways, Deborah. The first one is as you would exercise your right to request something as an elected member at any time. The second one, if it was an operational matter, it would be under the business continuity plan that we have. The third one would be through the project management reports and outcomes from that. So it's just line of communication stuff.
While we'll discuss this at the workshop around reporting, my intention with project reporting is to, rather than just to totally focus on our major projects, is any other projects which are of probably a threshold in value. If they're in red, they'll be reported to the committee.
I think that's a valid point, Kelvin, is that whilst we're concentrating on those major projects, there are others that come up from time to time, as Deborah said, that and it's, you're well aware of that, I'm sure. So it's about us having the ability to delve into that should the need arrive, and being kept up to speed if something does arise.
One of the other things we need to focus on at some stage, and I'm going to talk about this a wee bit at the workshop as well, is capacity to be able to deliver, both from an operational perspective but also from a CapEx perspective. And we really need to get a line on that, because you know the landscape is changing that we're operating in. Legislatively, there's going to be further changes in the next probably 6 to 9 months. So that will place the organisation under pressure, and we need to make sure that we're resourced to cope and or where the pressure points are and how we respond.
So David, is that, except that is obviously risk and as audit and risk it is ours, is that something we would exclusively do here? And I'm looking to you, Sam, as whether that's a discussion we have as full council, whether we filter it through this first and give a recommendation back. I'm just really looking for, I guess, where you see it sitting, Sam, as oversight there, and yourself, David.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be a match of both, and understanding that we don't want to go for this subcommittee go wider than what the terms of reference really allow and the delegations that the council's currently given it. But if the work program sits here, then this is where it needs to be. But if there's a recommendation back to council or anything it needs lifting up, then more than happy for that to sit at the full council table.
David, with just what you've mentioned, I guess what brings to my mind is two issues. One is in-staff training to diversify, to be able to manage that diversification within our organisation. So it sort of lines up with the employment contracts and the requirements for when we hire and when we have changes and we don't need. I'm just looking at our skill base and the diversity of that skill base. Do we take people on short-term contracts? Where do we fit with those that are on long-term contracts? So I guess it's around employment law and the issues around there.
Well, I guess there's two different issues. The employment law one I'm not going to get into at the moment, but the real key thing, and you've heard me talk about it quite a lot, Deborah, collaboration within the sector. We all note that there is shortages of skills, and I made the public comment once that I'm advertising for a water engineer tomorrow. I don't know the name of that person, but I know he currently works for another council in Canterbury, or she. And everybody laughed, and then they sort of took a deep breath and realised, yeah, that is the problem. Second thing we're facing at the moment is that as long as our borders remain closed, our sector is impacted, as a number of other sectors are as well, particularly in specialist areas. One of the big challenges that Murray Washington's going to be facing over the next 12 to 18 months is engineers in water spaces. They just don't exist. And yet the demand from central government, let alone local government and the private sector, is going to be quite horrendous. So we at Canterbury level particularly have a very, very good relationship, a network of relationships amongst the councils, and we work very, very hard recognising the need that we don't want to get and steal people off each other, but rather complement the skills that we've got.
Slightly moving away from the topic at hand, but all good information, David. I'm sure, yeah, those constraints are noted. Look, if there's no further questions, the recommendation is that we receive the draft Audit and Risk Subcommittee Work Plan for 2021 for its information and consideration. If we have a mover there, and seconded, Councillor Epihar. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, Kelvin. I think you're remaining in the seat. Pages 54 to 97, sensitive expenditure.
Okay, a few points here to note on this. So while this is not a review of our policies, it's really a paper to discuss taking a principled approach to sensitive expenditure. So key thing here around sensitive expenditure, it's items which are I'm going to make sure that we stand up to public scrutiny. So the front page test is the pretty critical one for us, is where we sit. We could go down a path of binding ourselves up in rules and regulation and how we approach things, but sensitive expenditure changes in nature depending on public opinion at the time and various other matters that go in that regard. I think the one thing, just to be clear on what that sensitive expenditure is, it's where spending could benefit a staff member or an elected member, and it's also perceived a perceived benefit in most of the times. So the principles that we need to follow are really, is it justified? Is there a real business purpose for it? So can we tie back to the expenditure that's going to be incurred to a real business reason? Have we been able to preserve impartiality? So we're avoiding bias or preference over others. Decision made with integrity. We're all appointed into these positions with trust, and we're entrusted to do things. It's making sure that we show that integrity when we make the decisions. Is the expenditure moderate and conservative? And so this is about making sure that we're not gold plating what needs to occur. So is it the right form of, and travel is a key one with this, and catering and various things like that. Are we doing what we need to do to keep our staff safe in terms of their travel? So they're staying at hotels which are reputable, safety. Example from previous employer after earthquakes in Canterbury and earthquakes in Wellington was, is the earthquake standards right at the hotels we're choosing to put our staff in? So being mindful of that, but also being mindful of the cost. Being fully transparent. So are we happy to make sure that the decision we've made can stand up in public? We're willing to show the reasons why we did it and have those critiqued. And then, of course, does it meet delegated authorities? Do we have the authority to make that expenditure? So when considering those principles, none of those principles override another. They're all tied together and run together. And none of them have a greater bearing than any other. So this set of principles needs to be led from top down. And so over the next 12 months for us is really about embedding those principles and making sure those principles are well understood by our ELT, by yourselves as elected members, and then rolling that down through the organisation. So as a piece of training or education that will go on the next wee while as a fraud and corruption training, I intend to weave this into that because it's very similar type lessons and messages that need to be used. So the other thing we'll do within this is just as policies are coming up for renewal and review, we'll be making sure that lens of sensitive expenditure is being put across them. And then the other piece, which just working through how this may occur, and it requires a little bit of work in the background around data, is taking some sensitive expenditure reporting. Sort of think of it as probity reporting, so review of travel, those sort of sensitive areas, and making sure that we've got visibility over what is being spent so we can review that to make sure it feels appropriate. The biggest deterrent in these things is having someone overlook expenditure, visibility on it. You think twice when someone else is looking at something. So I'll just take questions on that.
Thank you. Just with regards to our role as elected members, we have both a delegations manual and we have policy manuals. And under our roles and responsibilities, we have to be able to monitor both because they're one of the two documents that actually manage our organisation from an elected member perception through the chief executive. So that's our role as a governance board through to the chief executive. I note that in our delegations manual, we're often adjusting the amount of expenditure that a manager can have priority over. My next question is, do we have appropriate policy around that expenditure to know where and what it's being spent on? Is it travel? Is it food? Is it hiring? Is it a contingency cost? It just highlights, I think, that we need to develop some policy around that delegation to further understand, you know, what its limits are, and can it be, you know, without the policy, can it be used for other issues or other things? So just reading this report just highlighted a whole lot of areas around that. So is that what you're envisaging with regards to our responsibility in monitoring sensitive expenditure?
In terms of monitoring sensitive expenditure would be, yes, those areas are reviewed, and more from a management point of view that we are monitoring them. So each group manager should be reviewing the sensitive expenditure in their areas, and so on, that flowing back up, and then an exception type report would come to this group to make sure that we're reviewing that. In terms of delegations, the one trick there is I personally want to do a review of our delegation levels to make sure that they're appropriate within the organisation, and that should be something that's done on a regular basis. I would be reluctant to apply sub-delegations within a delegation to say you can spend X on this and X on that. It just gets very bound up and very hard to manage and monitor.
And I think the thing we would add to that is, in my monthly reports to council, it's not uncommon for variations to delegation 95% of time. That is to acknowledge staff who have left or new staff who have come into the organisation or maybe moved through it. Also, I'm comfortable with the policies that we currently have in place, and I can recall a few occasions, not a lot, because everyone understands the delegation, but where our staff, particularly in Kelvin's department, are aware of those delegations and have come to me and pointed out where somebody's exceeded. So,
yeah, thanks for the report, and I just highlight two things that you have that I think is a good way of going about this, that it's a principles-based way of approaching it rather than a firm set of rules that can't necessarily apply in every occasion, and the way that you've highlighted too that the principles needs to be taken together and not one piece pulled out of that. I think there's a good broad way of actually understanding the variances that the occasions that this gets used in. So thank you.
Morena Calvin, thank you very much for the report. I just have a statement really around the expenditure policy and an appreciation for the inclusion of koha and recognising that. I appreciate that it's in there, and also appreciate the level of conversations and a development of relationships that it allows for with mana whenua and also throughout the country with tangata whenua, especially as we're moving into new spaces. So I'm appreciative that it's within the policy, and thank you for your work.
Kelvin, are there any final comments you want to make following those?
No, it's just, as we said, it'll come back through the one the workshop on reporting where sensitive expenditure will, and then on to a regular schedule.
We'll continue on. Unless anyone's great. Continue on through the DX. Great. So that is Kelvin, you saying at the front desk, exactly for 3 people. The next one.
Thank you. Not a lot to highlight in this report. It's not a lot going on really. Key points or highlights are as facilities are now back up to full noise, and with COVID restrictions well and truly at a minimal. Just want to note there how busy our building and resource consent department is, and the LIMS area. Both of them are incredibly busy with requests and issuing of those. I note the LIMS, which sits within my area, 297 in October. We've just had the November numbers come through, and they were at 303. So it's growing and growing. So the pressure's on, which is a good sign for the district. Generally, overall, with the financials, we're running with a net surplus at this point. The operating expenditure is thereabouts around the budget mark. Capital program is a little bit back on that, but phasing at this point where we're looking to have a deep dive on where that is, so we have a clear view on what sort of level of carry forwards we'll have going into July 21. I'll just take questions on the rest of the report, if that's all right, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I think rather than do a page turn, Kelvin, which tends to take an awful lot of time and not actually achieve a lot, because most of them, there's no question. I think if everyone's comfortable with that, we'll just open to questions on the report as a whole. I'm seeing no one disagreeing, so Deborah.
Okay, my issue is around property limbs. And I guess it's more that while we're getting an increased level of property limbs, it's the quality of information on our property limbs. I believe that property limbs is a two-tiered system. You can either get the cheap version or you can get the more expensive in-depth version. And I don't think a lot of people buying property understand what a property limb actually should entail. And to highlight this, I'm just going to give you an example. A property limb covers resource consent applications, any building issues, plus any policies that council may have that you have to refer to. And a property limb can actually highlight an issue up front. Now, people have a perception, it seems, that where you highlight an issue from any document up front for clarity, from a bylaw policy, resource consent application, etc., they may view it as affecting their private property, devaluing their property. I'd like some sort of acknowledgement that when people come and apply for a property limb, if something is put up front to highlight that it's taken from the property limb basis itself, and it's only in a highlighted issue, And it's always been there if they had have gone and got a full property limb and viewed the resource consent conditions, or any building conditions or any bylaw policy, because it's just so important for people's understanding, where they assess that as soon as something's highlighted on that property limb, it's going to devalue their property. And I don't know how we get around giving that information or clarity around that information on the property limb to the people that are getting it. So I guess the challenge is putting more information up front as to how to understand the property limb. A lot of people just leave it to their lawyers and assume that, you know, their lawyers are going to explain all of this to them, or they don't read the fine print. So I really think we need to up our game with how we're actually, you know, explaining property limbs to prospective buyers. More of a statement and a question. Sometimes I just have to give an example so you actually can follow what I'm trying to say here.
Deborah, we'll go away and take a look at that. I take the point on that, understanding there may be something we can do around education on the website around how to read without us taking some responsibility for providing legal advice. So just be mindful of that, but take that point.
Yeah, thanks, Kelvin. Just two things from me. So your fairly consistent report to prior period and all the right growth in the right areas as expected. I just heard one question for my own understanding. The aquatic centre with the operational loss, how much of that is because of the interruption? And I guess is there an expectation once we meet practical completion that the aquatic centre will then eventually make money, or will it always make some kind of loss? Like, is it a profit making entity? I guess is my question. No,
No, it's
obviously
not.
that 123 will. Some of that is related to the interruption.
So some of the interruption is COVID related around attendance and restrictions on that. The other thing is their policy is not to fully recover the costs of the aquatic centre. It's the operating costs of about 50% to be recovered through fees and charges for general public use. So it's not a profit centre.
Yeah.
It's a
Like even.
yeah, something that we put back into the community for the public.
And my second thing was just around the cash flow. So we've said that the borrowing will incur by about 20 mil, but position's likely to change. Is that likely to change? Is it increase or decrease on the 20 mil borrowing? The cash flow statement. I might have jumped a little bit.
What page am I?
You're on page 120.
It said it's likely to change, so I'm just interested in your expectation. Is that a bit increase or decrease in borrowing?
Yeah, uncertain at this point, and it's really a placeholder at that point around the 20. And why that is we're looking to do that, as I said, the deep dive on capital projects, just to see what level of carry forwards we'll have or not. The level of borrowing is going to be increasing and reasonably rapidly.
Thank you. That's all from me.
My question's on page 124, and something that I've raised before is around the building consents and timeframes. And on page 126, the graph says the average number of processing days is between 18 and 20 days, which is the highest probably it's ever been in the last 10 years anyway. But when we look back at the actually number of percentage completed within 20 days, it's sort of 50%, 50 to 60%. And I guess this is around being able to, the reputation of us as a council, and being in a space that's able to turn things around. And I understand there's unprecedented, demand on our services at the moment, and particularly in the last couple of months. But that's tracking in the wrong direction. And I think waiting for it to get better is not going to be the right attitude. So just wondering what steps have been taken to improve that.
Yep, sure. So through you, Mr. Chair, I'll start and then Tim will jump in behind me, but we're actively recruiting Sam at the moment. Weird sort of comment, but it's not a bad problem to have. And the reason we are where we are is because of the huge numbers of building consents that are coming in front of us. You're seeing the impact of the private plan changes or private plan change applications and the likely impact they're going to have. So we've got a fairly stringent recruiting process, which Tim will talk to at the moment, and also further engagement with our staff. Tim.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, thank you, David. Yeah, we have been able to recruit. I mean, it's all come about, I guess, since COVID. We did predict a 30% drop off in volumes. We had a moratorium on recruitment at that stage. Instead of a 30% reduction, we had a 20+ increase. So we're 50% out, which was a wee bit unfortunate. And I'm afraid there was a wee bit of lag in terms of, we actually had a record month in the last month of lockdown, which was just no one could expect. So we are recruiting. We are using contractors. We've had Christchurch City Council people in. We've had WIMAC people in. But there's always a lag in terms of our wave sort of follows us. We anticipate that we will probably be in a much better position by March next year. There is going to be a bit of a time. We have written to MB telling them that we have been struggling and given the reasons, just in case there was a threat to accreditation. They haven't responded. And we are in communication with our customers on a regular basis, telling them that we're under the pump, but we're doing the best we can. So we do expect it to turn around, but it might be a couple of months. And we continue to recruit and been reasonably successful at that.
And also ties into my comments previously about resourcing levels and also the importance of collaboration amongst councils.
Just further to that, Tim, while I've got you here, it's around LIMS, and Deborah's just spoken about LIMS. And I've had contact, and won't go into any details, about the time frame of obtaining a LIM, which is a similar conversation. And the query was, and it's been dealt with, staff dealt with it very well in the time frame, and understanding that, you know, the constraints that the department has, and absolutely everyone there will be doing the best. It's not a criticism of staff at all, because it's an extremely difficult situation. But the query that came back to me from the customer was, if we're struggling to meet those timeframes, why are we still advertising that on our as the time frame on our website? And I don't know whether we've got a statutory obligation to state the 20 days or whatever the time frame happens to be for the particular thing. But is it perhaps pertinent to have an addition on our website to say we're currently, you know, undue pressure upon our services, and we may struggle to meet those timeframes? Because if you're putting an offer in on a property and you look at those timeframes and say, yep, we've got X number of days to get this information, then we can confirm our property. So I guess, sorry, it's a bit of a roundabout question. Do we have the ability to advertise in times like this an extended time frame? And if that was so, I think it might alleviate perhaps some of the pressure, because we've built an expectation that this is the time frame we will deliver in, and if we can't, because of this undue pressure, perhaps we leave ourselves at a bit of a reputational risk.
Yeah, Kelvin may want to make some comments, but there is a statutory time frame for LIMS, so we can't extend that. But I don't think there's anything wrong indicating to our customers that we are extremely busy without actually extending the time frame, but just letting them know that we are under pressure in terms of our resourcing. And I know that Kelvin's been busy looking at resourcing for the LIMS outfit, so hopefully that might improve soon, Kelvin. But I think a note could be worthwhile, just saying we are under pressure.
I just think it'll give us that wee bit of understanding amongst the community that, you know, whilst we have a statutory obligation to meet that time frame, that in certain circumstances, and I mean COVID was a good example, that there are circumstances that prevent us meeting that time frame from time to time.
And I think we look at the stats, and you've all had a look at page 122, and you can see where the LIM numbers are for the first 4 months of the year. They're 50% up on where they were last year. And let's just remind ourselves that 6 months ago, we were talking about our rate increases and the annual plan we were putting forward for the financial year that we're currently in. And we were budgeting for a 30% drop in consenting numbers and all other applications. After 4 months, we're actually plus 21% on last year. So a 51% movement from where we were. So it's good news, bad news. Good news is that we're continuing to grow at a probably even stronger rate than we had planned to do. Bad news that it's putting a lot of pressure on the organisation, and it is difficult to recruit in that space at the moment, but very much top of our minds, Mr. Chair.
Sorry. No, just with regards to property limbs, it's just highlighted another issue. And I guess it's a little bit of a history issue, but there was a major fire that was experienced in the Ellesmere filing system that affected a lot of property limbs. So therefore, the information that one would expect to find on some property limbs may be rather limited due to that major loss in the fire. And I just want to, I think we should be able to cover ourselves where there is deficiency on a property limb with regards to that particular loss. What's our requirement to actually highlight that missing information? It was beyond our control. It happened, I don't know, when was the fire, 60s or something? Yeah, it was major, but it took out a lot of property limb assessments. So some of them are going to be really light with regards to the information. And I just think, what responsibility do we have to actually highlight that deficiency, or can it come back and bite us?
Well, I think there's two issues. You can only give people what you've got. That's the first thing. But the second one is, as technology advances, we also look at better ways of recording the information that we're holding. So it's how do you capture digitally? And technology allows that to happen, but the investment in both resources and equipment to protect for the future, it's often a hard hurdle to have to jump over. That's the problem we're facing.
I have one, if everyone's finished, I've just got one question, page 113 on the water supply funding impact statement. And I see operational costs unfavourable, and it may not be that we've got the answer now, but it's just to ensure that if that's an ongoing issue, those operational costs, that we've got those included in the LTP going forward, Kelvin, I guess is quite important. If that's become the new normal, we are reflecting it in the current LTP discussions.
Yeah, we are reflecting that. It is an increasing cost around that
testing and what have you.
Testing, yeah.
No. Being no further questions, I'll ask for mover and seconder. Sam again and Bob, all in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, Kelvin. That's fantastic. You can get a spell in the back seat again for a while. Pages 135 to 146, major projects financial report. Craig. No, we're not. We'll do that when it's PX.
Page 135.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The property report for October, we go through to page 138. Start off with the indoor courts facility. The indoor courts facility is looking to finish in the February-March period, which is ahead of the original plan. At the moment, it's 68% complete, and there are no issues affecting the construction phase at this point. We go on to the Selwyn Aquatic Centre. The project status for the construction site, it's working on an accelerated program, and that is on time. We have an extension of time claim of 13 days, 12 of which are all weather related. So they're actually performing quite well on that program. The maintenance side of things is now substantially complete. We're actually going to finish up within budget on that, on the maintenance side. In saying that, the unexpected maintenance, there's always ongoing issues as soon as we pull off a wall or what have you. The current one we're facing at the moment is water or moisture in the soffit, which was due to the pressure problems which arose through a faulty sensor. That has now been remedied, but the whole cost is looking to be in the vicinity of 185,000 to actually fix that. We actually have put in a monitor up in the roof space to actually give us warning if the pressure sensor fails again and we finish up getting negative pressure or positive pressure instead of negative pressure. At the moment, it's holding fine and it's working well.
Sorry, Craig, so that wasn't a design fault as such, it was a component failure?
As from what I'm aware, it's a component failure.
Thank you.
Yeah. The Rolleston Town Centre TRRT, that's proceeding well. The problem that we've had on that is the design and the structural issues around the facade. That's all being resolved now, but we're currently going to have about a 1.5 month delay on the project. The biggest issue that we have here is that we have got design fees which will continue to grow on that project because every time we want to have a redesign or it will increase the cost. But I'll report on that separately when the time comes, because at this stage we're well within our building contingency on that. Just the Rolleston Town Centre, the town square, and the retail side of it. As we mentioned before, that the town square is we're coordinating a new design, and that is a risk for the amount of fees that we're going to have to pay, because we've already paid one set of fees for the original design, and now with the redesign there will be another set of fees going forward on that. The retail side of the project, the resource consent for the car park layers and the Wordsworth Street upgrade will be submitted this month. Lincoln Reservoir, that's just progressing as normal. There's no change from my previous words around that. Pine Solar Drying Hall, that's actually work. The total construction has started on that now. We've done all the foundation preparatory work. The biggest, we have technical equipment, which is all coming from Germany. That is, we've got shipping dates for that, but the biggest risk we have on that is the ability of the ports to actually handle the containers. There is anecdotal evidence that there is the ships will only remain in port for the amount of time that they've booked the wharf for, and if the containers are not cleared, they sail, taking the containers with them. So it might finish up going up and down New Zealand a couple of 3 times. We don't know. The health hub, the project's going very well. All the external wall framings up, and the rigid air barriers are complete. So essentially we'll be able to close the building in and make it weather tight, which before the end of the year, which will be good. The risks about it is CDHB and PRG, our main tenants, continually change their requirements for where they want pipes. And once you've poured a concrete floor, it becomes problematic about where you put the holes. So we are keeping a register of all client related changes, and they will be charged for the variation. So currently there's about $300,000 worth of charges which have to go back against those two. So we're keeping an eye on that.
So Craig, they're accepting that is going to come to them, and we're not going to end up in a legal constraint where they suddenly say, well, we didn't have this conversation.
It's all being documented. They have not signed off that they accept it, but it's from a CDHB point of view, that's what I'd expect from them. But I'm fully aware that anything that they ask to have done, now that the floors are all poured, is on them, not on the council.
I guess what I'm really saying is that we've got a clear process, that we don't lead in ourselves in a legal action, because we haven't had agreement from all parties. Normally a variation I would have expected would be signed off by both parties before the work took place.
Yes, the
Concerned about
variation.
where we leave ourselves.
Yes, the variation is signed off both by the engineer to the project and to the architects, and the tenant is advised at that point that this is their cost. So there's a paper trail where they have been advised, because it's not a council problem that they all of a sudden have changed where they're going to put equipment. We extended the time to allow them to actually finalise their design, but we're still getting design changes coming through, which is not good.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just a bit concerned about that, and I would agree that we wouldn't actually be doing any work, any drilling of anything different without the signed approval of where the payment and liability sits, and how that will be funded, whether that's a cash payment or included in a rent lease change. So I don't know what we do about that, but I feel like that leaves us with 300,000 currently unresolved at the moment.
No, it doesn't, because we have a commitment to provide a certain amount of funding for their fit out that was built into the tenancy, and we will not pay any of that money until we've got all this resolved.
David's taken some notes here. I think we've made our views quite clear, I think. So we'll await some feedback, David. Thank you. Carry on, Craig. Sorry.
That's okay. The final item on my report is the Rolleston Drive, Dryden Ave, Markham Way extension. That's now well and truly underway, and we're looking to have that complete by the end of January.
Sorry, mic not on. There being no further questions, I'll ask for a mover and a seconder for that. Councillor Reid and Councillor Hassan, all in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, Craig. And that brings us to the end of our public meeting. Thank you everyone for their attendance, and I'll just call for someone to move us into PX. Sam and Deborah, all in favour? Against? Carried. And we'll close off the live stream. Thanks, Stephen. We'll just have a very short break if everyone